For the peach almond crostata, we're going to start with our pâte brisée, which is just our dough that we're going to be using as our base. You could add some sugar to this to make it sweet, which would make it a pâte sucrée, but we're actually going to be just doing it a savory crust at the moment. So we have our all-purpose flour and we have our salt. We're going to mix just into our bowl. And then we have cold butter right from the refrigerator that I've cut into small cubes that we're going to place into the flour. So break it up so each piece is individually coated with the flour. And then we're going to kind of just mix this in by hand, breaking up the butter as we go with our fingers and tossing it in the flour and kind of pulling it apart to break it down. So we're going to do this over a period of time. You want to try and do this quickly so that the heat of your hands doesn't melt the butter, but it actually creates it to be able to mix in with the flour to create your dough. So you want to incorporate that flour and the butter together as you're tossing it and feeling around for any of the large chunks. We're going to mix this until it's a coarse meal. I'll show you what that looks like when it's done, and then we're ready to add our water. So to get our water ready, it's best if you have it very cold. So I like to put a couple ice cubes and then measure it out when I'm ready to add it to our butter flour mixture. So we're going to continue to mix this, and then I'll show you when it's ready for course meal. Once the dough starts to take on a little bit more of a moist consistency and it turns a little bit more yellow-like in color, you know you're getting close. And what I'm really feeling for now is just any large pieces of butter that I don't want remaining. And the consistency should be kind of like a wet sand course meal. So you can definitely do this in the food processor on pulsing, but this is just a way, in case you don't have a food processor, that you can accomplish this by hand. If you make a larger batch, it's just a little more time consuming, but we're definitely getting there, and you can see it's kind of a coarse meal. You do not want to keep mixing this until it fully comes together. That's what the water is going to be for. So this looks really good. I don't feel any large pieces of butter in there, and it's got the perfect consistency that I am looking for. So now we're ready to go ahead and add the water. About 5-6 tablespoons or so you're going to add. So I am going to measure this and just put it in here. So again, I don't pre-measure and then add the ice because I don't want to add more water than is necessary. So always start with a little bit less, and you can always add a little bit more. Tossing that together gently with my fingers, moving the bowl around until it holds together as a dough. Once this comes together, then I'm going to place it into my parchment paper, create a ball without overworking this. We really just want this to come together. Place it right on top of here. It's a little bit messy, but that's okay. Get your hands dirty. Place it right onto the sheet here. Don't overwork it, like I said. And then we can take our parchment paper and we want to let this rest. So we want to give it about 45 minutes to an hour to let that butter solidify and to let that rest. We'll come back and then I'll show you what it will look like when we're done. Please make sure you do let this rest in the refrigerator so that the butter can set up. Otherwise, at room temperature, it's not going to do you much good. All right, so we're going to be making Frangipane today, which is a lovely almond type of pastry. And we are going to be putting in almond paste. When you get almond paste, make sure it is fresh, and you can tell by when you feel the package, it's nice and soft. And we're going to go ahead and mix that until it is broken up a little bit. Using a paddle, put it on about second speed and break it down. All right, after it's broken up, it takes about a minute or so to break up the almond paste. The smaller pieces, we're gonna go ahead and add the sugar. And this will help break it up into smaller pieces as well. Once the sugar is incorporated, we're going to add our softened butter. It's really important that that butter is room temperature. And you're creaming it now. So the creaming method is where we generally take the sugar and the butter until it's nice and smooth and light and fluffy with a paddle. but we're also incorporating the almond paste at this stage. It's nice and creamy and all the butter has been absorbed. And at this stage, we're gonna add our eggs one at a time. If you add them too quickly, the emulsification does not occur, therefore it's going to be very lumpy. And we want the eggs to get incorporated very nice with the rest of the batter. So we're going to add these one at a time. So now all of our eggs have been incorporating into our Frangipane mixture. And you can see that I actually use a paddle fitted with a scraper attached to it already. If you don't happen to have that, you just want to use a rubber spatula and make sure that you scrape all the way through to the bottom every time you add that egg. So stop the mixer, lower it down and scrape it so you really get everything underneath. But these attachments work really well. So I'm happy with using this one. So the final step in making our Frangipane is adding our small amount of bread flour, and I'm gonna do this on first speed just until it is incorporated. As soon as that mixture is incorporated, you turn it off and you can reserve this mixture for whatever use you would like to use it for. This Frangipane is ready to go. It is slightly loose, so it can be used right away or refrigerated so that the butter has a chance to set up again. The beauty of this mixture is that it can actually be frozen for many months and then thawed at room temperature. To roll out our dough for our peach almond crostata, we want to take it out of the refrigerator, unwrap it. It's nice and cold. We want to use it right away. I'm going to make one large one. You can also make a couple small ones if you like. And then we're going to dust our cutting board, kind of move that flour around a little bit so it's not too much on there. And then we're going to dust the top just a little bit. I do not want to use too much flour to dry out my dough, but I do want it not to stick to the cutting board. So what I'm going to do is start by kind of pounding it out to soften that dough without having to work too hard. And if you have any cracked edges, it's just because it's very cold there. Just kind of push them back together and warm that up with your fingers. I'm going to go ahead and do it the other way. This will allow the dough to soften, be a little more pliable, and flatten at the same time. I'm going to put a little bit of flour on the top, making sure that my bottom, move it into the dusting flour, is not stuck. And then I'm going to start to roll. So what I want to do is I want to use my rolling pin and my hands and go all the way to the edges without going over the edge like this. We don't want it to kind of tuck itself in there. We want it to stay nice and even throughout the entire distance. So once in a while, I dust the top, and every time I'm ready to roll, I give it a turn so that my body is not going different ways. It's always going the same direction, forward and backward. If you feel like it's sticking on the top, put a little bit more dusting flour and move it around. And then also move it on your cutting board so it's going into the remaining flour, and then give your dough a turn. Every time you touch it, you should be able to feel the thickness of that dough. And we're aiming for about 1/8 of an inch thick, and I'm trying to keep it in a nice round. Obviously, we started in a square, so it's not going to be a perfect circle. So you want to work fast, and I can feel the thickness if my edges are thicker or thinner than the center. So I'm about a finger lengths in, putting a little bit more flour, and really focusing on certain spaces. Now this is a rustic tart, so it does not have to be perfect, but I will trim it so that it is more of a rounded space. So again, very gently, I never lift it off the board, I'm just turning it, focusing my efforts on some of the edges, and trying to get about 1/8 of an inch thick, which this is perfect. Now what I want to do is I want to trim up just so that I'm a little bit more rounded. So when I do go fold my edges over, they are a little bit more even. but I'm not taking very much off. You can see this is only the waist I have. Now to transfer this, I don't want to assemble my tart here. I want to assemble it on the sheet pan because it's going to be really difficult to move it once I put my peaches and my frangipane and everything on it. So what I want to do is I want to roll this up over my rolling tin very gently, lift it up, place a parchment or silicone lined sheet pan right here, and then gently pull that over. Make sure it's nice and even. So again, when it's nice and cold, the beginning is when you want to do this part. Now I'm going to put this back in the refrigerator for a few minutes to get it cold again so it's easy to work with. And then we're going to start to layer on my frangipane and my peaches. Now we're going to work on our peaches. So the way we want to cut them is, you can see this kind of ridge here. You want to go right with that. And if you're lucky, you will get peaches that will come off. These are called freestone. The other ones are cling. So sometimes you try and twist it and it just sticks. If you can find these are amazing because it gives you a really clean look. So I want to cut these peaches about 1/2 inch thick. So we're going to cut strips. Looks like I'm getting about 5 per side. It's really going to depend on the size of your peaches. So this is appropriate size so it can bake in the oven and not fall apart too easily. In order for us to not have too much of the juice leach out and give us a little extra flavor too, we have some little bit of cornstarch and some vanilla sugar here. If you don't have vanilla sugar, just use regular granulated sugar. But right before we assemble this, we're going to toss these peaches in a bowl, sprinkle it with this mixture here, and so any juices that flow out will congeal in the oven from the cornstarch thickening that juice. So that's how we're going to assemble. We're going to take our crust out of the refrigerator right now, go ahead and put the frangipane and top it with our peaches. Our crust is not firm, but it is nice and cold again, yet still pliable. We want to kind of mark out, and I can just do it with my fingers here, a little bit of a circle that we can make sure that we don't go over. So the whole idea here is we're going to fill it with the frangipane, top it with our peaches, and then fold over the crust in a decorative fashion. So we don't want there to be no crust to fold over. So I want to make sure I don't go too far out to the edge. Now you can definitely put some jam on here first if you have any jam. Blackberry jam would be amazing with this, raspberry. But I'm just going to go ahead and put the frangipane directly on here. You can take it right from the fridge or it can be sitting out, doesn't really matter. Place it right into the center and then take a small offset spatula and push it right to where that little marking is that I made. Move it all around in a nice even layer. So you can put as little or as much on as you like, but be careful not to put too much because then it won't bake the crust underneath. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and top it with our peaches. So our peaches I placed in a bowl, and I'm going to take that mixture and sprinkle it on to the peaches and then just kind of gently toss it all together. You want to do this last minute because it will get a little bit gummy and we don't want too much of that hanging out and leaching out the juices. So we immediately want to go ahead and place our peaches in a decorative fashion all around our tart. There are many ways to close this open-faced tart up, but we are going to just take our edge and brush it with a little bit of egg wash. Brush the whole edge first, trying to avoid getting the brush in that frangipane. This will help glue the edges together when we're ready to have them touch. So have that handy still, and what I want to do is kind of fold this over gently and just over the tops of those peaches, and then brush the top of that with a little egg wash. And then you're going to fold this over in this same direction, but moving it around the tart so that you get a decorative overlay around the tart. Now you can do this small, you can do it large, like so if you do a lot more of them, you'll have a little bit smaller folds, but because this is such a big tart, I like the look of the larger fold. Again, if your dough is getting very soft, it's very warm in here right now, you can put it back in the refrigerator and do this. So you can use the refrigerator as a way to kind of, help you along and not be so frustrated with the dough itself. Okay, so we're going to continue this around the entire edge. The final step for presentation of this tart before we bake it off is decorating the outside of the crust with sugar. Remember, there's no sugar in this crust, so it could really use a little bit more sweetness in the whole dessert. And you're really relying on the sweetness of the peaches and that frangipane to make this sweet. So this is a very European style dessert that doesn't have a ton of sugar in it. So I like to use the turbinado or the demerara sugar for that extra crunch around the edge, if you can find that. Otherwise, this is actually my favorite, but this is really hard to find. And this is the Swedish sugar, sometimes it's Belgian sugar, but this is a really beautiful look. So this is my personal preference. Most people won't be able to find this, so you're gonna wanna just sprinkle this generously over the edge, and that'll give you a beautiful crunch and sweetness to the final product of your dough. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. You can also take some nuts if you wanted some almonds, sliced almonds, untoasted because it will get toasted in the oven, and you can sprinkle that on the inside part now if you like, or on the crust itself. So I'm being very generous with this. And then this is ready to go in the oven. Personally, I like to let it rest for about 30 minutes in the refrigerator to get it really nice and cold, and then put it into the hot oven. All right, our crostata is finished baking. It's nice and golden brown. Our frangipane is lightly browned here as well. You can always add more peaches, but I just distributed the ones that I had cut. The most important thing is to take a spatula up underneath, and then you can go ahead and look under to make sure that it is nice and brown under. That's the most important thing, that it is fully cooked. So just double check that before you fully take it out of the oven, and then let this cool almost completely before you eat it. You can always reheat this the next day as well.